Okay, so now we're working on installing the rear coilovers, and what we need to do when we do that is remove the torsion bar. I've talked about the torsion bars a little bit. The way the torsion bar works is it applies basically a twisting force against the chassis, and then when you go over something like a bump, it straightens out that torsion bar, and depending on where that torsion bar is indexed at, it's always going to want to return to its original position, kind of like how a coil in a spring is sprung. It has a rate and it is twisted at a certain rate, and it always kind of wants to exist at that rate. Our coilovers they have springs in them, right? So we are going to remove the torsion bars completely from the chassis. In order to do that, you have to do a lot of work. It's not a simple thing. I've actually written out all the steps here. I typically write out what I'm going to do to the car, just to keep me, every time I walk by it, it kind of forces me to jump back into it and look at the next thing and figure out what's going on. Step by step, it's a lot. You have to basically remove everything in the suspension components for the rear. We're going to be getting in alignment anyway, so that part's fine, but I'm not looking forward to getting some of these 30, 40-year-old bolts off. So yeah, you have to basically remove all the suspension components, obviously wheels and tires, sway bar, all that stuff. Drop basically the torsion tube housing down and pull the torsion tubes out. So that's what we're going to get started on. I'm going to work through these steps, pull the torsion tubes out, put everything back together, and then as I'm putting things back together, I'm going to install the coilovers. I'm going to leave them indexed pretty much where they're at, and then I can, raise and lower them once I figure out the wheel fitment. And we'll do that kind of after we've gone through everything here. So this is going to suck. Let's get started. So if you see me do something on this side, just assume I'm going over to do it there on the other. I mean, it's the exact same procedure on both sides, just to get the torsion tubes down and out. So you can see under here the sway bar. What I'm probably going to do is take the end link off right here and leave the rubber bushings attached and leave the sway bar attached. I don't see any reason why the whole sway bar has to come off. We're going to drop these trailing arms, and I don't believe those will pinch it because they're going to be suspended. Maybe it's better safer to just pull the whole thing off. I just don't like how rusty this hardware is, but I think we are just going to pull the whole thing off. So yeah, I'm going to get started on that, and yeah, just start pulling all this stuff out. All right, that is the rear line, the rear brake line disconnected and plugged. So run over and do the other side, then we'll unplug the brake wear sensors, then we can start dropping stuff down. So we'll be gluing that back on. I did not realize that would stop the plate. It looked like it would fit right out of that hole, but it did not. So the other side, I'll open this up before I unplug that. Zip tie that in place all together. Oh, good times. All right, so next up is getting the bolts out of the axle so I can drop the axle, and so eventually when I drop the rear end, I don't damage it. Well, when I drop the suspension, I don't damage it, excuse me. So this should be, let's see here, an M8 head. Let's see if we can get it to fit in there, yeah. So I actually didn't have that tool, so I had to go out and get it. All right, let me start pulling these things out, and we can drop the axles. What I've done is I've actually uninstalled the axle, and I'm just going to explain what I did.
First I did this inside side. I realized that it wasn't coming out. I was like, shoot, I've never done an axle on this car before. I don't know which side I need to undo to drop it, which I should have thought about beforehand. It turns out it's this side. You can see there is a lot of room here. When you pull it off, it basically drops right off. So this is held, you know, just like that. There's those 3 M8 bolts, excuse me, 3 sets with these little shims on them. And I just used, you know, an M8 head and snuck each one out. And I used, once I broke them loose, they were a little bit tight. Once I broke them loose, I used this to kind of pull them backwards as long as, you know, the heads felt good, which all but one did. So yeah, we've got this out and hung up here on a piece of like rear subframe type deal behind that fuel filter, which looks new, which is good. Yeah, so now I'm just gonna go over there and have some fun doing the other side. All right, so the next bolt up that we had to pull out to drop all this stuff is this one at the top of the trailing arm. It's a 19 on both sides. It's this bolt here. Was able to get my electric impact on it and get it out, which is nice. That electric impact has been helping me a lot. You can see, sorry about the bright light, you can see that's the far side of the other side there, so both bolts are out. I now need to tie a heavy-duty rope. These things are heavy as hell, and once I drop, there's 2 more bolts I'm going to drop. This whole thing is going to be hanging, which will allow me to kind of, basically, we're going to suspend it in place and work the torsion tube down without it. Yeah, so it's going to be fun. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, so next up is kind of tying this stuff. I've been marking the spots where the bolts go so I know which ones go where. Yeah, so let's get this tied up and get moving on. Okay, so I'm still working through a DIY on removing the torsion bars. And I got the first bolt out, and then you're supposed to suspend these trailing arms here, because essentially they're just going to hang. What I realized was if these are hanging, the DIY that I was following, which is from Clark's Garage, which is pretty good, basically what's going to happen is the suspension, the rear suspension, is going to be the only thing hanging on. There was no step to take out this bolt. So what I did was I removed the bolt. What I didn't do on this side, the first side, here, was basically I didn't take the tension off the suspension. I just ran the bolt out with the electronic power tool without, you know, kind of releasing any tension on the strut, which basically caused it to come out at an angle and gacked these threads a little bit. So what I've done is I've gotten a tap and die set. I'm going to run a die across the, oh, look at that crease in the exhaust there. That's interesting. At some point it looks like it hit that, which is pretty wild. Sorry, back to topic. Run a die over the bolt and then tap these threads again. So I got 2 taps, basically like a starter tap and then a bottom tap to kind of bottom out the threads. And hopefully that should work and give me something. If not, I'll have to buy an entire trailing arm assembly, which is super fun. So back to it. So we're going to remove these 2 bolts here and these 2 bolts here, and that should leave the rest of the trailing arm basically hanging. So once I reinforce it with some bungee cords, I'm going to do like an additional hang point. We'll do that. Okay, so we are unloading basically the spring lever to allow this rear end to drop. What's interesting is this DIY that I'm following again. It's Clark's Garage, so I thought it'd be really good. I must have missed something because this suspension isn't unloaded enough to sneak this bolt out, and that's part of kind of the steps that I'm on. It's a little bit frustrating. Next up, we're going to be dropping the whole rear end, so we're going to put a jack under the torsion tube. Which now looking at it, I'm not exactly sure how that's going to happen without the exhaust coming down. Again, another frustrating thing. Basically what is going to have to happen is we are going to release this bolt here and this bolt against the body back here. I'm not sure if you can see what I'm pointing to. Yep, down here. And then this whole thing should start to come down. I need to do a little more investigation because it doesn't look like it's going to clear the exhaust. So I may have to drop that too. Okay, super fun. Let's go on to that. You can see that I've dropped the exhaust up front and kind of pivoted it to the left to access the torsion tube. And I've put my jack directly under the middle of it. Everything is unbolted that should be, aside from the 2 bolts that hold basically the spring plate assembly and the torsion tube assembly, all that stuff that's kind of bolted together to the car, to the actual chassis. So how my understanding of this is going to work is 2 bolts on each side, pull those out, and then I should be able to kind of pivot this down. The trailing arms are hanging, so I don't think there should be any problems there. I should just be able to kind of tilt this forward, and that's the hope, because, you know, you've got brake lines. They are disconnected from the calipers, so there's enough play there, but you don't want to, like, rip them off the chassis. So I'm going to go slow, side to side, kind of pry it down. One thing that's not covered in the DIY is how to get the actual covers off, and the covers, I believe, are all, you have to take all 4 bolts off each side. I'm hoping it's easier to do that with the assembly down than it would be with it up. So if I can get it off without removing those bolts, great, but I'm kind of anticipating, you know, more stuff that wasn't listed out. So let's go undo those 2 bolts and see if we can get this thing down. This up here and this down here should let this entire assembly come down. Like I said, this is the cover. I'm not sure how that's gonna come off. It looks to me like it is wedged in between these plates, which I've got some of the bolts out, but not all of them. So we're gonna have to look at getting that out. Yeah, so let's get to it. All right, so the last bolt on each side is out. I am going to try and use a pry bar to start pulling, you know, these sides down, see if I can go side to side and just get this whole assembly to come down. And if I can't, we'll be taking a look around and seeing what else might be holding the whole thing to the chassis. So, fun. Okay, so again in the DIY, one thing they didn't cover, so you definitely have to pull this bolt because this entire assembly comes down. They don't talk about pulling this bolt, which I don't know exactly how the access to the back of that bolt works. Anyway, it's not in the diagrams, and the diagrams aren't accurate. So what I ended up doing was pulling those 2 17mm bolts. They're kind of a pain in the ass to get to, but it's letting this whole unit kind of start to pivot down. Once I started to pry, the entire thing started to move. So what I had done to kind of find that was I was pulling on it and looking at, okay, where's the tension? And I stopped flexing in this mount, which makes sense. Like this whole spring plate, I mean, that's what it's designed to do, is kind of transfer the tension of the torsion bar into the chassis. It's just a little frustrating that I didn't know I had to do that. So I'll go do the other side, and then we're going to work it down side by side, hopefully get it low enough that I can figure out how to get the cover off and pull the torsion bar out. All right, so as you guys can see, this has turned into quite a mess. I finally pried both sides down, and I'm actually a little bit ahead of where I left last time, where this was still attached, right? So this sits in here, and I pried it away from the body, and it took a big pry bar. You need a pretty big pry bar. I'm a little bit of a hefty guy now, and I wasn't able to do it with anything smaller than like a 36-inch pry bar, and that really worked well. And you just go gently side to side, dropping it onto the jack there. Now, when I got down here, I realized this bolt had to come out, and this is how you adjust the camera on this car. It goes through the spring plate into the trailing arm. This is the spring plate here, trailing arm. This is the cover for the actual torque tube that we're trying to get rid of. So this is the last bolt. This is taking me a really long time. The other side's almost this far along too. Having a baby is insane. It makes this take a little while. So I just wanted to have you guys here. If this is, I mean, that was the last bolt. Let's see if we can get this stupid torque tube out. And then we'll go do the other side, and I'll do a rundown of all the bolts. All right, so I've pried these two apart. Moment of truth here. Hey, there it is. I just gotta figure out how to get everything apart and back together. But that is the entire assembly out there. I'm just gonna break it down and see if I can pull it apart. That was a much bigger pain in the ass than I thought it was gonna be. Alright. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. So you can see here, we're finishing up this side. Everything's pretty much bolted back together over here outside of the axle and the brake line, which is why we can get so much, clearance here. You're kind of looking at the bullshit that goes along with doing this. Basically what I've had to do is once you get the bolt back into the body for the entire torsion bar, there's another mounting point up here, and there's 2 bolts that go in and a rubber hanger. And basically once you drop this, I dropped it in the middle with the jack and brought both sides down and then jacked it back up that way. But everything is kind of hanging at an angle. The center of gravity is behind the torsion bar when you have everything bolted up. And it's a real nightmare to get back together. So what I did was I put basically the whole trailing arm back in, bolted the entire hub back on, everything outside of the brake line. And then I jacked from under the brake hub and used a piece of wood that I intentionally crushed to push the mount horizontally. Even though it's bolted in, there's a lot of play in the rubber bearing, a little bit in the mount itself. And then you're basically just doing what you can to get the bolts back up into the body. It's a nightmare. Took me an hour per bolt for those 2 bolts and probably an hour per bolt on each side for the body mounts. So I still have to go do the other side for these 2. Real pain in the ass. But we're getting there. I'll drop this back down, go bolt up the other side, and then we can start getting things back together. We'll bolt we can bolt the axles back up, we can get the brake lines back in, start thinking about bleeding the brakes, tightening everything up, and getting this thing back on the ground, which will be insane. And actually, when we get it back down, we can install the coilovers, which is what we did all this for. So as soon as, basically once everything's set back up, I have to re-tap. I've screwed up the threads a bit on this side, so I'm gonna use a tap and tap the threads and a die to clean up the bolts. We'll do that too. But big process. It's been over a couple of weeks now, using 2-3 hours every couple of days where I can get it to work on it. It's been a real nightmare. So let's go get the other side done and then get things bolted back together. All right, so I just got the chassis mounts done here. So we have all of the mount points done. There's like a banana mount point up here. That basically really is only doing its job when the torsion bars are in. It helps apply the torsion. It connects to the end of the torsion tube where the torsion bar lives. At the moment it's slotted in. It's not perfect and the bolt isn't in. The weight of the car is going to keep it in. I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm going to fiddle with it later. I'm going to get back to putting things back together so I can install the coilovers. So now I'm going to crawl under the car. I'm going to bolt up the exhaust. And I'm going to work on, after that, basically aligning the rear on both sides. So I'm going to get these as close as they were. I scribed a mark around where everything was sitting. All the bolts are in, they're just loose, and I'm basically going to do a very basic alignment based on where these were living. And I'll bring you in and show you that when that's done. And then from there, I'll probably put the axles in and then install the coilovers. I mean, we'll be pretty close. So let's get under this thing, get the exhaust bolted back up that was in the way before, and get moving. It's an aftermarket exhaust, so it's kind of gross. The installation isn't great, but working with what we got, so rock and roll. All right, so we got the exhaust hung back up, which is great. I got the brake lines replaced and reattached on both ends. Awesome. So what I've done is I've started to kind of align the car. You'll see I have a jack here just under the side of the rotor and caliper. I could put it further under, but that's fine. But basically I'm just trying to get this to an angle. I did a rough scribe, it's not great, of where the hub was and the trailing arm, all this stuff was sitting before I took it apart. All right, so you can see here the bolts I was talking about. Here's the center bolt, and on the other side of this, that's where the sway bar mounts to. On the back of this, there's a 27mm head in kind of an oblong shape that sits in a hole back there a little bit, and it kind of adjusts where the front of this rides like forward and backwards. And that's going to control kind of the height at where this is sitting. You can see how high the scribe marks here. They're not really marked well. I did it quickly. They're also, if I were to tilt you way down, you can see they're also pretty far down on the bottom. And then these two, you can kind of slide back and forth if you need to make adjustments, kind of up or down a little bit, depending on where the back spring plate is. So yeah, that's what I'm tight. This one's still loose. I'm going to tighten that one up. I'm doing them by hand kind of slowly. When I use the impacts, it has enough power that it can kind of over torque things and pull them out of the position I need them to kind of have them held in. So we're going to do that now. So these other two bolts are similar. They're not the same, but it's a really good way for me to show you what's going on here. So on the back side of this, there's a hole that this fits into, but as you rotate this actual thing, so you tighten up the nut and bolt, but if you kind of over tighten them or you get it into the position, it's going to rotate this entire assembly on the back side. This back side it's either a 32 mil or a 36 mil. I think it's a 32 mil. And you basically get it aligned in the position. I want it aligned basically where it was, and I'm going to tighten it down and try to keep this circle here exactly where it needs to be oriented, not to change the alignment of everything. So as I jack this up further, you're going to see the actual alignment on the rear spring plate change. It gets wedged a little bit and it starts to straighten out, but you'll see I can actually get it to the point where I scribed it at. All right, so this is the cool part about working on this stuff, is understanding how this works. I read the diagrams 100 times and never got it. But what you'll see is the hole, where the actual bolt head goes through is kind of oblong, but then there's that circle for the back of that, the bolt that I was showing you. So once you get it to sit flush, I know the front is where I want it to be. Put it in there. And then rotate it until it sits flush. Boom. Right there, sits flush. You got your alignment right. Okay, so this is the tools I use just to do the end of the torsion bar removal, not everything. This is what I use to get things lined back up and in. It's not going to pull everything. It's not all the tools to do the job. This is how crazy and messy it gets just lining things back up, which is kind of hilarious. And this isn't everything. There's like PV Blaster, wood blocks, things like that over there. So I'm going to wave my hands over this, magically make it all disappear, and then we'll talk about the last stuff we have to do to finish installing the coilovers. And presto, I don't think my editing skills are that good, but everything's cleaned up, all the tools are put away. It's really refreshing when you've been working on a project. 6-8 weeks that I've been doing just an hour here, an hour there, 2 hours here, 2 hours there. At one point it was about an hour per bolt, depending on what I was doing, just because everything under there was really old. No rust, which is great, but everything was definitely, it had been there for 35, 40 years. So everything was taking forever. I was leaving all the tools out. It's hard to stay organized. Pretty much the sides of the car were just all Jackson tools. So everything's pretty much picked up, and we can move on to the final steps, which are actually, after all that, installing the coilovers. We have gotten the torsion bars out. Hooray! So that means these rear coils can finally go in. But before we do that, I have to fix a mistake I made. I was trying to do this kind of quickly in the beginning. I was also very tired. My daughter was like a week or two old when I started doing this project. Fronts were, you've seen it, not that bad, just a couple stupid things. But the rears, just all that torsion bar stuff, I really wasn't anticipating how hard it was going to be. And I was taking out the rear factory suspension when I was starting to pull it apart. I just used my new impact wrench with its beefy new battery and pulled out the rear bolts, and they were hard coming out. And I should have known to stop and think about it, but again, probably on an hour, maybe 2 sleep, and I just ripped it out. And what I found was I gacked the bolt pretty good, which means I also, in that aluminum trailing arm, where the hub is and where the bottom of the suspension bolts to, I also gacked that pretty well. So I've never done a tap or die before. It's a good time to learn. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run this M14 1.5 thread pitch die down the bolt. I'm gonna use a little bit of cutting oil. I'm gonna put in my vise in the other room. I'm gonna run it down the bolt, clean up the threads, and then that's just to give me some experience of feeling out what it's gonna feel like. And then I am going to do the same with the trailing arm. So I am going to go, well, not the same, but instead of using this die here, I'm going to use a tap, and I have two. There's basically a gentler tap that you start with, and then a more aggressive tap that you move to. There's kind of 3 levels that you can go to, but
I'm going to start with the first tap that kind of creates the threads. There are already threads there, so it should go okay. You know, every time I hit a good snag, I'll back it up and then keep going through it. And then I'm going to do the same thing with a little bit more aggressive. And then I'm going to hand tighten everything and see how it goes.
Okay, so you can see here the threads that I've kind of gacked on the way out. You can see the ones that are a little bit darker, the original color of the bolt, have, you know, no damage to them, and I kind of like thickened up where the threads should be. So hopefully running this die down will fix that. Let's get started on that.
So similar to how I cleaned up the threads on the bolt, I'm actually going to have to clean up the threads that bolt fits into. So what I've done is with the die set, I've also bought a tap set, and I've got a couple of different taps. There are really more tapered taps for when you're setting up kind of a new, if I were to say like install a different engine and drill new motor mounts into a piece of metal, right? Wanted to create threads for that. I would use like a really tapered tap like that there, and I bought that just in case I would need it. But I think like a standard bottoming tap is going to do just fine after looking at the threads that I just cleaned up. And essentially what this does is it's the opposite, right, of what we did when we ran down the bolt. So I'm going to lubricate this up. I'm going to use the T-handle that comes with it, and I'm going to run it in where the bolt was slowly. And every time I hit resistance, I'm going to back it back up. And that should clean up everything enough for us to be able to get our coilovers installed, and that'll be pretty much the final step in installing them. We got to torque a couple things down, but that'll be it. Looks to be about the right length. We have 24 threads on each side, so they should be set roughly to the same height, though the alignment is pretty funky right now with me having pulled everything apart. So this stuff is going to have to change a little bit over time. That's what we're going to start with. So I'm going to go kind of test fit this, and then we'll throw the rears in the car, and that'll be pretty much done. We still have to bleed the brakes and torque up a couple of things, but that's pretty much it. Okay, so I gave my best friend and mechanic a call, Nick over at DOS Auto, and he reminded me that everything was hanging probably at full extension. So just because of the convenience of being able to hand thread that in and how everything was kind of lined up, I wasn't thinking. And as I jacked it up, the angle increased slightly. There's still contact here. You can see it's hard to hold the camera in a light, but just a little bit, and that's with the bolt fully threaded in. So we're gonna run it like this. I don't love it. I wish there was just like, I don't know, give me like 1/8 of an inch of clearance, you know what I mean? Like, I'll even take that. The spring isn't making contact anymore, which is good, but I do feel like the perch itself is, obviously still touching, and this is completely jacked all the way up. Like, as soon as I let this down, that's going to be kind of sitting on that too. But it is what it is. I don't know what else they could have expected me to do. Maybe you can adjust this bottom perch upwards. I'm sure they'll get back to me if that's the case. I do see, threading on it. So if I can bring that up a smidge, that would probably help. Yeah, so we will
We'll take a look, maybe some adjustment in there or something, but these can kind of fit as of right now, and I can keep moving forward. So I'll take it.
So we just finished flushing the brakes. When we disconnected the rear brake lines and replaced them when we were doing the rear torsion bar delete, I noticed that the fluid coming out was disgusting, and I checked out the reservoir and it was black. It's pretty gross. So what I did was I tried to get whatever I could out of the brake reservoir, and then I bled the entire brake system, flushed it completely out. While I was doing that, I tried to be pretty careful, and I did let the line go just below, the fluid line just below where the clutch master cylinder is fed, but it looks like everything worked out okay. I started up the car, engaged the clutch, the throw was pretty much the same, clutch feel was pretty much the same, there was no sponginess to it. It's always been light on this car, it still felt light, it still engaged, I don't know, maybe a 1/4 inch down from the top, and disengaged from the bottom, about a 1/4 inch too. So, all that seems really good. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna throw the wheels back on the car, drop it down, and see how it sits. Alright, so that is the coilovers finished. I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm surprised at how low it is. There's a lot of adjustability. I can go up a lot, I can go down a lot. These are massive tires, and they are tucking a lot in the front. I mean, so that's where the sidewall sits. This is way up there. I'm probably, I rolled it freely. The whole car you can move. But boy, there's not a lot of clearance. So we have different wheels and tires that are gonna go on this. But I just couldn't, it looks great. It's on its face and I really like that. But yeah, that's everything done for the suspension. We're gonna go over how crazy the rear suspension was. Front suspension, not that big of a deal, pretty standard. Don't love the way the coilovers themselves are built. Was pretty unimpressed with that. Same with the rears. I was given directions like just space things out, put spacers here and there, don't love that. But it works. So yeah, let's go through and just talk through what we've done, and we'll be finished with the suspension. We can move on and do other fun stuff. All right, so we just finished the rear suspension. We dropped it on the ground. I think it looks great. I really like where it's sitting. I think it might need some adjustment though. But what we did do was basically drop the rear end is how I put it. Boy, was that a project though. Here are all the steps I did end up doing. I wrote them out individually. It's an insane amount of work. I'm gonna make a short video on how to do it. Just the steps you need. If you're gonna do your rear torsion bar delete, what do you need to do? And that's I just wrote, drop rear end. It's ridiculous. It doesn't have to be, it's just the angle on everything makes everything a little bit crazy when you're trying to put it back together, jack everything up. You have to get the perfect angle on every bit of the car, and it makes it kind of a nightmare. But yeah, so like removing the wheels, sway bar drop links, disconnecting the rear brake lines, you're unbolting every single bolt, and there's wild sizes back there. 24 mil with a 27 on the back, a 24 mil with a 36 mil on the back. It's a little bit nuts. So basically, and I tried to do it through a DIY that I found. It's definitely not applicable for this car because it's not how the spring plates or the trailing arm are set up at all. I really ended up taking every single bolt out. I scribed the outside to get kind of a rough alignment. It doesn't look great, it doesn't look horrible. It's gonna get aligned anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I try to get it good enough to go down the road without the whole car going crazy. But yeah, I don't know, 15 or 20 steps. The first time doing a big project like that with a kiddo, I'm doing it just like tonight. It's a long day. I came down here to work for an hour or two. I've been doing it in 1 or 2 hour bursts. It took maybe 15 hours first time, just because every single bolt seemed to fight me. It's an old car. Most of those bolts were original. The suspension was definitely original. I should have it out here. It's blown. You can see, especially the rears. One is sitting completely compressed. One slowly slid out. Just a ton of work to put into it. There were bolts that literally would take me an hour a piece to get in or out. So it's not crazy like the idea of what you're going to do, but in practice, it definitely takes time. If you're going to do this, make sure you're not trying to rush anywhere. Yeah, I don't ever want to do it again. It's kind of like I did like hardwood flooring as an upgrade to my home. I told my friend I would show them how to do it, but I wouldn't do it again for them. Like, I'm not going to do it with you. I wouldn't want to do this with you. I would show you how to do it. Here are the bolts you need to pull out. You go ahead and do it. So we did that. We installed the coilovers. I measured the rear sway bars. They're 14 millimeter. They're small. If I upgrade the rears, I want to upgrade the fronts. Maybe I'll do those. We'll see how it handles. I mean, it's on coilovers. We're going with different wheels and tires. So the whole handling profile is going to be completely different. And obviously we torqued the wheels down. What a crazy amount of work that was. Also, as far as a tune-up goes, we can put down here that we flushed the brakes. So I'm just going to write flush brakes, and we can cross that off. Got tons of air in the lines, realized also that the brake fluid was disgusting coming out of the reservoir, so the pneumatic bleeder that I had wasn't going to work, so my wife came down and pumped the brakes for me, which was awesome, and I just worked every single corner with fresh fluid. I didn't bleed the clutch, no air in it. While it was up, I had the wheels off, I started the car, opened the garage up, started the car, engaged the clutch, felt where it engaged and disengaged, didn't have any problems. It basically is what it was before, so I'm good with that. For right now, I should clear the fluid out of it. I definitely will, especially if I ever do a clutch on this or a master or slave, I'm gonna have to do it anyway. So I'm just gonna let it sit for right now so I can get to the other projects. I think that's pretty much it. Dear God. Next, we're gonna move on to the interior stuff. So that was I think in total that took me 6 weeks of just coming down here when I could, getting stuff done. It's the middle of the summer, I got a bunch of other stuff going on, so it was crazy, but we did get it done. I think the car looks good. I'm really excited about it. The wheels, which are over there, are going to be awesome. We will do a quick test fit and see kind of how they sit, get a rough estimate on tire size. They're a little bit wider with a little bit more aggressive offset. Not much more though, so it should be, these are 15s, those are 16s. I think it's going to be perfect if I can get a little bit of stretch on the tire. I'm probably going to have to roll the fenders a bit if that's an option. It is an option, I can do that. Yeah, so that'll be something cool to do. But yeah, we're gonna do the interior. The window switches are wired in relay. I think that's part of the issue because I replaced part of that last year, so I want to look at the window switches. We've got the hub and the wheel to install. We've got the shift knob and the shift knob adapter, and then wiring the radio. That with the wheels, and then cleaning. We've got some final touches stuff here. A really good cleaning, a really good detail. There's a wax that I know that's made specifically for red cars and I'm hoping can give some life back to this paint. All of that stuff is coming up and I'm really excited about it. I think this car, it's one of those things, it's cool because it's like the first step and it's already made such a big difference in what the car's profile looks like. I'm really excited to do the rest of the stuff. Yeah, thank you guys for watching. I think this video is going to have been a long one. Definitely look back for another short video on quick DIY of how to do this. I want to put together kind of my thoughts on it in case anybody has to do the same thing. Just a quick little these bolts, this stuff has to come out, that sort of thing. All right, thanks so much.
As always, thanks for watching. Tune in next time as I overhaul the 944. If you've got a second, hit that like and subscribe button below. It would really help me out.